Red and blue lights strobed through the pines. I had one glove off, stacking split oak beside the porch, when tires crunched up my drive at a slow, careful speed. I set the axe down on the stump, the way you set down something that can be misread. Two county SUVs stopped short of the steps. No siren, just idle lights and exhaust. The lead deputy stepped out with his shoulders squared. The second stayed near his door, eyes fixed on my hands. "Evening," I said. "What's the call number?" The lead deputy blinked, surprised I didn't start with excuses. He glanced at a tablet. "Welfare check, also a report of armed intimidation." I nodded once. "Who's intimidated?" He didn't answer. "Sir, do you have any weapons on you right now?" "Not on me," I said, tipping my chin at the stump. "That's an axe, for wood." The second deputy shifted his stance. The lead deputy's eyes tracked the axe like it might bite back. "Any firearms in the residence?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "locked, legal." He looked past me at dark windows. "Permission to come inside." "Do you have a warrant?" I asked, mild as a question about the weather. His jaw tightened. "We're not trying to make this difficult. We got a call, said you threatened a neighbor, waved a gun, and might be unstable." There were no neighbors within shouting distance. The nearest cabin was empty until spring. Whoever called had been close enough to invent details. "I haven't seen anyone today," I said. "I've been cutting wood since noon. Snow will back me up." The second deputy's eyes flicked to the ground. The lead deputy cleared his throat. "Complaint says you're running an unpermitted generator at night." "My generator has a county permit," I said. "Want the tag number?" He hesitated, then looked at his tablet. His shoulders loosened a fraction. "You live alone out here?" "Usually," I said. "Tonight too." He typed, "Any mental health issues we should know about?" "No," I said. The second deputy tried again. "Can we at least confirm you're okay, sir?" I lifted my hands a little. "You're looking at okay, cold, hungry, not planning any crimes." The lead deputy watched me, searching for the twitch, the flare, the excuse. Finding none, he stepped back down. "All right, we'll clear the welfare check, but if you've got issues with your HOA, handle it civilly." "My what?" I said. He looked puzzled. "Homeowners Association, they called it in." That word didn't belong up here. I'd bought this cabin because it was older than their paperwork and, according to the deed, outside their lines. I watched the deputies climb back in. The lights died. The dark rushed back into place. As the engines faded, I noticed an envelope taped to my door. It was thick, sealed, printed in an official font that tried to make anger look polite. HOA letterhead. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table beside my mug. The cabin smelled like wood smoke. The envelope smelled like toner and control. Inside was a packet, stapled 3 times, full of glossy photos taken from the road. My woodpile, my chimney, the generator shed, the faded cabin number sign, red circles, captions. Unapproved exterior storage, improper smoke emissions, unpermitted accessory structure, noise nuisance. Each line had a date and time, like someone had been keeping office hours outside my property. Behind it, bylaws were printed and highlighted with the joy of a person who likes rules most when they can bruise someone. I found the signature, Darlene Whitcomb, HOA President, neat handwriting flourish. There was a hearing date. There were escalating fines. One sentence sat on the page like a thumb on a throat. Failure to comply may result in enforcement action, including involvement of local law enforcement. My deed and survey sat in the safe, showing the subdivision boundary missing my cabin by a thin strip of forest. They should not have had jurisdiction. Either they didn't know, or they were betting I didn't. My phone buzzed, blocked number. I answered, "Hello." Her voice came through warm, practiced. "Good evening, this is Darlene Whitcomb. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Depends," I said. "Are you the one sending deputies to my porch?" A pause measured. "I'm calling to resolve a situation. We have standards in our community, and your property is drawing concern." My property isn't in your community, I said. She laughed softly, as if I'd misread a simple sign. That's what everyone says at first. You'll attend the hearing and you'll bring proof of permits. We're very reasonable when people cooperate. Who filed the armed intimidation complaint? I asked. Another pause. People are nervous, you're secluded, you have equipment you keep to yourself. That frightens folks. What folks? I asked, looking out at trees and dark. Her tone stayed polite, but sharpened underneath. Mountain roads are dangerous in winter. If you make this difficult, you will have more visits, more reports, more paperwork. You don't want that. I let the silence stretch. Is this about rules, I said, or is this about you needing to win? The warmth drained from her voice. It's about protecting our investment. You chose to live near us. That was your decision. I chose to live away from people, I said. Apparently you don't read maps. We'll see, she said, and the line went dead. I pulled on my boots and went outside with a flashlight. The beam cut across the porch boards and down into the snow. My footprints looped between woodpile and door. Beside them were fresher marks, tire tracks that had eased in, turned near the shed, and eased out without ever coming up to the porch. Someone had practiced the approach. Someone had timed the space. Someone wanted to know how fast a patrol car could turn around in my yard. The mountain went quiet again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. The hearing was held in the clubhouse, a low building that smelled of carpet cleaner and reheated coffee. Folding chairs faced a long table where the board sat elevated on a shallow riser. Darlene Whitcomb occupied the center seat, posture straight, smile calibrated. A recorder blinked red beside her, already running. When I entered, conversation softened, eyes tracking me as if I carried snow inside. Darlene thanked everyone for coming and announced the agenda before I sat. She spoke about safety, values, and harmony, never mentioning my name until the room leaned forward. Then she slid a stack of photos across the table like evidence. The hearing was not a hearing so much as a performance. Board members nodded on cue, hands folded over printed packets identical to mine. A man introduced as a safety consultant clicked through slides that cropped the edges of my property, trimming context until the images told the story Darlene wanted. He spoke in absolutes, voice trained for municipal rooms, citing risks without sources. When he finished, Darlene asked if there were questions, eyes already on me. I asked one. I asked for his license number and the issuing state. The consultant hesitated, coughed, and said he would provide it later. Pens paused. Someone in the back shifted. Darlene recovered smoothly. She thanked the consultant and redirected to procedure. Violations were read aloud, fines proposed, timelines assigned. Each item carried a polite threat. I responded in writing only, sliding copies of permits and photographs across the table without commentary. When I referenced the survey line, Darlene smiled and said boundaries were under county review. The phrase landed wrong, practiced. During a recess, the sheriff approached me near the coffee urn. He spoke low, careful, eyes scanning the room. He said donors cared about appearances and the cabin was an issue. Compliance, he suggested, would end the noise. I asked whether noise included false reports. He didn't answer. That night I laid the packet beside old plats on the table and traced the lines with a pencil. The subdivision boundary missed my cabin by a strip of trees narrow enough to step across, wide enough to matter. Darlene's language blurred that strip, substituting confidence for authority. She wasn't mistaken. She was manufacturing jurisdiction through pressure and repetition. Outside, engines passed on the road below, slowing as they reached my drive. Headlights brushed the snow and moved on. I wrote a timeline, dates and names, and noted the phrasing she favored. Patterns emerge when someone is in a hurry. Winter makes everyone impatient. The next morning, a tow truck idled at the bottom of my drive, amber lights winking without commitment. The driver said he had orders to remove an unregistered vehicle that did not exist. He showed me a work order stamped with the HOA logo and a county routing code. I photographed it and handed it back. He shrugged, relieved, and left. At the county office, a clerk recognized my address and stiffened. She whispered that someone had requested my full property file, expedited, and then pretended it was routine. She slid me a receipt copy with a timestamp that predated the hearing. Outside, My phone buzzed with another blocked call. I let it ring. By afternoon, deputies returned with a different tone, all process and distance. They cited complaints about noise and access, handed me a notice, and avoided my eyes. I asked for badge numbers and wrote them down. One looked embarrassed. The other warned me about forced inspections. After they left, I walked the perimeter and found fresh stakes driven into the snow, marking a line that did not exist yesterday. Someone was rehearsing a boundary. I pulled them out and filled the holes with slush. The mountain watched, indifferent. I made one call to an old colleague and asked for observation only. No favors, just eyes. That evening, the HOA held another session, shorter, sharper. Darlene announced emergency measures and cited community fear. She spoke my address aloud. A bell rung in a crowded room. I slid copies of the survey to each board member and watched who read and who pretended. Darlene thanked me and said the county would clarify. Afterward, the sheriff found me again. He said the calls were stacking, that dispatch logs were thickening. He said he didn't like it. I asked what he needed to stop it. He said jurisdiction and patience. I had one and was practicing the other. When I returned home, a trail camera stared from a pine, strapped high, angled with care. I disabled it and left it where it fell. The message wasn't for me, it was for whoever reviewed the footage. I sat on the porch steps until dark finished settling. Somewhere below, an engine idled and moved on. I reviewed the day and wrote it clean, stripping adjectives, keeping facts, names, times, phrases, the way Darlene said county review, the way the sheriff said donors, the way deputies avoided eye contact. This was not chaos. It was a plan advancing by inches. I closed the notebook and checked the locks. The cabin creaked as temperature fell. My phone lit once more with a blocked call. I answered this time. Darlene did not bother with warmth. She said inspections were coming, that resistance would be noted. I asked her to put everything in writing. She said she preferred conversations. I said I preferred records. Silence followed. When the line went dead, I looked out at the trees and smiled once, briefly. Pressure leaves marks, so do hands. I turned the porch light off and let the dark reclaim the boards. Snow began again, fine and deliberate. Somewhere paperwork was being filed with confidence. Somewhere else, someone believed persistence would replace authority. I wrote one last line in the notebook, dated it, and set it by the door. Tomorrow would bring more visits. I would bring receipts. Winter rewards preparation and punishes noise, and the mountain remembers every footprint left behind. The anonymous tip came in just after dawn, according to the deputy who read it aloud on my porch. He stood square to the door, gloves on, breath fogging, voice clipped and procedural. Illegal firearm sales, suspicious traffic, cash exchanges. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the hinge on the screen door, the way a man looks at an exit he hopes to use soon. "I'll record this," I said, raising my phone where both could see it. I didn't announce that it was already recording. I asked for the report number and the originating call type. He gave them. His partner shifted, boots squeaking on frost. I asked for probable cause. He said they were here to observe. I asked what they intended to observe. He said compliance. They did not step inside. They noted what was visible: serial numbers on a locked case through a window, the generator tag, the posted permit. They wrote carefully, each word a brick. When they left, the silence felt rehearsed. I replayed the recording and wrote down the phrasing. Anonymous tips always have fingerprints. This one carried the same language as the HOA packet, translated into police dialect. Later, a knock came that sounded like a favor. Earl from the lower cabin stood there with a basket, eyes apologetic. He talked about weather and roads, then admitted Darlene had asked him to keep an eye out, just in case. He hated the word. He said he'd lived here long enough to know trouble when he saw it, and this didn't smell right. I thanked him and invited him to sit. We watched the road together like two men waiting for a parade that wouldn't come. When he left, he took nothing with him except the understanding that being watched cuts both ways. Noon, a county truck climbed the drive with a fire marshal inside. The complaint was chimney smoke. He was professional, polite, and uncomfortable. He checked clearances and took photos. Then he said, without looking at me, that the complaint described the interior layout accurately, not possible from the road, not legal from the air. His pen paused. He asked if anyone had permission to be close at night. I said no. He nodded once and packed up, careful to leave no footprints near the window. I walked the perimeter afterward, counting paces, noting where snow lay undisturbed. Near the back tree line, a strap cut into bark at shoulder height. A trail camera sat angled toward the porch, field of view practiced, battery new. Whoever placed it knew how to hide glare and avoid animal triggers. I disabled it and set it on the stump, lens facing the road. I left it there until dusk, a quiet mirror. No one came to claim it. In the afternoon, mail arrived that wasn't mail. Notices from the HOA citing emergency measures. A letter from a bank asking about insurance continuity. The language tightened. Words like hazard and exposure appeared where community and values had lived. I called the insurer and learned a packet had been sent alleging violations. I asked for copies and logged the sender. It was efficient work, meant to force concessions before weather did. The sheriff came near evening, unmarked, tired. He stood with his hat in his hands and admitted dispatch logs were filling. He said he didn't like being used. He said the next step would be a safety inspection with deputies present, forced if necessary. I asked about jurisdiction. He sighed and said paper could make anything seem true long enough to matter. He asked if I had counsel. I said I had time. He said winter eats time. He left without shaking hands. That night, headlights swept the cabin at 2, slow and deliberate, then stopped. Engine off. I did not turn on lights. I sat at the table with the notebook open and listened. Someone breathed outside, patient. A branch snapped. Minutes stretched. When the engine finally started and retreated, the cold felt personal. I slept in short pieces and woke before dawn to the smell of fuel. The generator shed door hung open. The line had been cut clean and drained into the snow. No spray, no panic. Precision, enough to leave me cold without fire. I shut the valve, capped the line, and photographed the cut. The blade mark told me more than the act. This wasn't a warning, it was a test. By mid-morning, road work began without notice. A contractor parked equipment across my drive under the banner of maintenance. He showed me permits stamped with the HOA logo and a county seal that looked right until you held it too long. He said he was just following orders. The mountain narrowed. I logged it, photographed it, and called the county office. No answer. Snow started again, soft and steady, covering the cut line and the stakes someone had driven overnight at the wrong boundary. I made soup and waited. Calls came and went, one from the bank, one from the insurer, one from a number that didn't hide itself. Darlene's voice was brisk now, stripped of charm. She said cooperation would make things easier. I asked her to email. She said conversations were better. I said records were better. She said I was making this difficult. I said she was making it expensive. As light faded, an unmarked vehicle appeared at the turnout on the ridge. It stayed there, engine off, silhouette steady. The posture of watching mattered more than the presence. I recognized it the way you recognize a language you used to speak. I did not approach. I cooked, ate, wrote. The vehicle did not move. When night closed in, I stepped onto the porch and felt the cold settle into bone. Somewhere below, paperwork advanced. Somewhere closer, someone waited. I closed the door and set the notebook by it, open to a clean page. Each escalation had added weight. Each discovery narrowed the field. The mountain doesn't take sides, but it keeps score, and tonight the ledger felt full. The insurance call came first, polite and final. The woman spoke from a script softened by sympathy, explaining that reports had been received, that risk profiles had changed. That coverage would be suspended pending verification. I asked who sent the reports. She cited an HOA compliance office and a county routing number. I asked for copies and a timeline. She hesitated, then promised an email by close of business. I thanked her and hung up before anger could spoil my voice. Winter punishes gaps. Without insurance, contractors hesitate, banks twitch, and every accident becomes a lever. I printed the email when it arrived and stapled it into the notebook. Allegations read like echoes of Darlene's packet, translated again. Improper storage, code violations, unsafe access. The words had learned to travel. By noon, the road closed. A grader idled sideways across my drive, blade down, engine steady. Cones appeared as if they'd always been there. The foreman, red-faced and cordial, showed me permits laminated and clean. He said maintenance was scheduled, unavoidable, and temporary. I asked how long temporary was. He said weather-dependent. I asked whether emergency access would be maintained. He said yes, of course, then admitted response time would increase. He shrugged, not unkindly, as if distance were a natural feature and not a decision. I photographed the permits and noticed the seal again, close enough to pass, wrong enough to matter. When I called the county office, I reached voicemail. I left a message that sounded like a question and felt like a marker. The sabotage came after dark. I smelled fuel before I saw it, metallic and sharp against the snow. The generator line lay cut, drained clean, no puddle where a panicked vandal would spill. Whoever did it knew how to starve heat without tripping alarms. I shut valves, capped lines, and wrapped what remained. My hands worked without instruction. I photographed the cut, measured the angle, logged the time. Precision leaves signatures. Headlights swept the cabin at 2, then died. An engine idled, listening. I sat at the table with the light off, breath slow, the notebook open. Someone outside shifted weight. Snow creaked. Minutes passed like they were being counted. When the engine finally withdrew, I wrote it down. Pressure tests boundaries. Someone was testing mine. Morning brought another letter, this one from the HOA, announcing emergency inspections in the interest of safety. The language implied consent by proximity. It listed deputies as present. I called the sheriff and reached him between calls. He sounded tired and angry in equal measure. He said the HOA was flooding dispatch, tying his hands. He said forced inspections were coming unless jurisdiction was clarified. I asked what he needed. He said proof and patience. I had one in a safe and the other in practice. I attended the HOA session that afternoon, brief and sharp. Darlene stood with confidence sharpened by applause. She spoke of community fear and liability, of responsibility she carried alone. When I presented the survey again, stamped and old, she smiled and said the county was reviewing updated maps. The phrase again. Board members avoided my eyes. One man read the paper and swallowed. Another tapped his pen too fast. Darlene thanked me and moved on. After, a clerk found me in the hall and pressed a folded note into my hand without looking up. Someone had requested my property file again, expedited, with instructions to flag discrepancies. The request came from an office that didn't usually care about cabins. The timestamp preceded the road closure. I thanked her and left before gratitude could become a burden. Back home, the mountain narrowed further. The roadblock held. The generator slept silent. I layered blankets and cooked on a small stove, careful with light. At dusk, an unmarked vehicle appeared at the ridge turnout, engine off. It stayed. The posture was familiar. Watch without intruding, wait without being seen. I did not approach, I wrote. The sheriff returned near evening, unmarked, hat in his hands again. He admitted the HOA president had been pressing donors and councillors, framing the cabin as a hazard. He said he was boxed but not blind. He asked if I had recorded interactions. I said yes. He nodded once, relief flickering. He warned that tomorrow would bring a forced inspection attempt. He advised calm. I told him calm was cheaper. After he left, I found new stakes along the tree line, driven straight, confident. Someone had redrawn the world overnight. I pulled them up and filled the holes. Snow fell and hid the scars. I checked the trail camera stump. It was gone. Whoever took it did not want the mirror. Night settled hard. I sat with the notebook open and the door locked, listening to the cabin breathe. The insurance email chimed again, asking for compliance. The bank followed with concern. Darlene's number appeared and vanished. I did not answer. Records prefer silence. At midnight, a truck crept to the roadblock and idled, then turned away. At 1, footsteps circled the shed and stopped. At 2, the ridge light returned, steady. I slept in fragments and woke to a world tightened by intent. In the morning, I repaired what I could, hands steady, breath slow. I set tools back where they belonged and cleared snow from steps that no one would use today. Each act was small, but together they formed a line. Someone believed inconvenience would bend me. Someone believed paper could replace authority. Winter had chosen its side long before either of us arrived, and it favored preparation over noise. I made the call after sunrise, before the mountain could decide who owned the day. The number was old, memorized back when memory mattered more than contacts. I asked for observation only, no fixing, no favors. I described the pattern without adjectives, listed dates and language, and said one sentence that carried weight: local enforcement is being manipulated. On the other end, silence held while someone recalibrated. Then a question came, careful and specific. Was this tied to the task force I used to oversee? I said not directly, but pressure was approaching places it shouldn't. The line went quiet again. Finally, he said he'd put eyes on it. That was all. By mid-morning, the sheriff called instead of visiting. His voice carried the sound of too many meetings. He said dispatch logs were stacking, that complaints had evolved from nuisance to safety. He said the HOA president had requested a forced inspection with deputies present and a code officer in tow. I asked whether consent was required. He said consent could be argued. I asked about jurisdiction. He exhaled and said paper makes arguments feel real long enough to matter. He asked me to stay calm. I told him calm was my baseline. He said tomorrow. I wrote it down. I drove down as far as the roadblock allowed and walked the rest to the county office. Inside, fluorescent light flattened faces. I requested a certified copy of the boundary review status. The clerk hesitated, then printed a form stamped pending. I asked who initiated the review. She said an HOA compliance office had flagged discrepancies. I asked whether discrepancies existed. She said not yet. I thanked her and left before patience could sour. The second HOA session felt like theater rehearsed without an audience. Darlene stood with a stack of papers and a tone sharpened by certainty. She announced emergency authority and referenced county cooperation without naming names. I presented the survey again, slower this time, and asked the board to note it in the minutes. Darlene smiled and said minutes would reflect ongoing review. One board member cleared his throat. Another stared at the floor. Darlene thanked me and adjourned. Outside, she stopped me, phone angled low. She said she admired resilience. She said it could end if I worked with her. I asked her to email. She said conversations were better. I said records were better. Her smile thinned. She said tomorrow would clarify things. I wrote it down. Back home, the unmarked vehicle was there again, farther down the ridge. The posture was patient, not predatory. Someone was watching the watchers. I made soup and ate standing up, listening to the quiet. The generator stayed silent. I layered blankets and wrote. Near dusk, the sheriff arrived in uniform alone. He stood by the steps and admitted he was irritated. He said the HOA president had been calling counselors and donors, framing the cabin as a liability. He said his department didn't like being used as leverage. He asked if I had counsel. I said not yet. He asked if I had recordings. I handed him a flash drive and said copies existed. He nodded, relief flickering, and then gone. He said tomorrow's inspection would happen unless something changed. He said he didn't want to be there. I told him I didn't want him there either. After he left, I found new tape along the road edge marking future work. The maintenance schedule had been extended. Temporary had learned to linger. I photographed the tape and wrote the time. The mountain went pink and then gray. I slept lightly and woke before dawn to frost on the inside of the window. The unmarked vehicle was gone. Its absence felt deliberate. I brewed coffee on the small stove and listened to the radio weather. Snow tonight. Wind. I wrote a list of questions, each one precise, each one capable of stopping a room if answered honestly. By noon, a message waited from the county clerk. Someone had asked to alter a plat copy for clarity. She said it felt wrong. She said she'd refused and logged it. I thanked her and told her to keep copies. I wrote it down. The afternoon passed in preparation. I laid out documents in the order they would be needed. Permits, surveys, emails, logs, recordings. I charged batteries and checked locks. I did not pace. Packing wastes energy. At sunset, Darlene called again, number visible now. I answered. Her voice was bright. She said inspectors would arrive in the morning with deputies. She said resistance would be noted. I asked her to put it in writing. She said she preferred conversations. I said records were better. She said I was being difficult. I said she was being expensive. The line went dead. Night fell hard. The roadblock held. Wind found gaps. I sat at the table and listened to the cabin creak. Somewhere, a plan advanced by inches. Somewhere else, eyes watched without being seen. I wrote one final line and closed the notebook. Tomorrow would bring a room full of people pretending paper was authority. I would bring questions sharp enough to cut through it. The unmarked vehicle appeared at dawn, not on the ridge this time, but lower, tucked into a turnout where frost kept secrets. It didn't idle. It didn't move. It existed. I noticed the way you notice a change in wind before weather turns. Someone was here to watch without being part of the story. I made coffee and waited. By mid-morning, I stepped outside with documents under my arm and felt eyes without seeing faces. The vehicle stayed put. The posture mattered more than presence. Whoever sat inside understood patience and angles. I did not approach. I logged it and went about my business, careful not to perform. Near the mailbox cluster, Darlene waited like a spider that preferred daylight. She wore a coat too clean for snow and held her phone at a low angle, lens pointed just enough to claim innocence. "We need to talk," she said, smiling for the screen she pretended wasn't there. "This doesn't have to escalate." I stopped at arm's length. "If you want something official," I said, "email me." She laughed softly. "You always say that. People want reassurance, not paperwork." "People want records," I said. "Paper remembers better than smiles." Her eyes flicked to the unmarked vehicle and back. "You think you're clever," she said, voice still warm, "but you're isolated. That makes things simpler." "For who?" I asked. She tilted her head. "For the community." I glanced at her phone. "Do you want me to say the line you already wrote for me?" The smile tightened. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Inspectors arrive tomorrow, deputies too. You can cooperate or you can look like you're hiding something." I nodded once, "Put it in writing." She scoffed and turned away, phone lifting as she walked, framing her victory before it happened. At dusk, the unmarked vehicle finally moved. It rolled up the drive without hurry and stopped well short of the steps. A man stepped out, hands visible, posture disciplined. He wore a jacket that meant nothing and boots that meant everything. He did not offer a hand. He identified himself quietly, credentials shown and put away with care. His eyes scanned the tree line, the road, the cabin, not in that order. "I'm here to assess whether local activity is compromising operations," he said. "Whose operations?" I asked. He named the regional task force, clipped and precise. He spoke my old language without accent. "And your supervisor?" I asked. He answered without hesitation. The name was mine. We stood there with the cold settling between us. He did not react. He did not smile. He asked for a summary. I gave him facts, dates, phrasing. I showed him the notebook. He skimmed, eyes fast, absorbing patterns. When I mentioned false reports and altered seals, his jaw set a fraction. "Have you interacted with the HOA president today?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded. "We'll need dispatch logs preserved, body cam too." His phone lit in his hand. The contact photo was unmistakable. The name label said Mom. He silenced it without looking. "She shouldn't be involved," he said, statement not apology. "She is," I said. He exhaled slowly. "I'll handle my end." The next morning came with a convoy. Deputies, a code officer, Darlene in a tailored coat with a stack of papers and a smile sharpened for witnesses. The sheriff arrived late, already tired. Darlene announced authority and consent in the same breath, conflating them like it was a skill. The code officer looked uncertain. The deputies stood where they were told. I stepped forward and asked one question, calm and precise. "Under what jurisdiction are you requesting entry, and do you have consent or a warrant?" The room stilled. Darlene spoke quickly, citing emergency powers and county review. I asked for the statute. She waved a paper. I asked for the number. She hesitated. "Sheriff," I said, "may I request a supervisor?" He nodded and made the call. I placed my own call on a secure line, brief and controlled. "We have an attempted inspection beyond jurisdiction," I said, requesting oversight. The unmarked vehicle rolled in like punctuation. The agent stepped out, posture rigid. He addressed me by formal title, voice carrying across the clearing. The code officer's eyes widened. The deputies straightened. Darlene turned, recognition hitting her in stages. The voice, the posture, the face she knew at family dinners now stripped of warmth. Her phone dipped. Her smile collapsed without drama. "Preserve all dispatch logs and body cam footage," the agent said, not to her, to the sheriff. "Effective immediately." The sheriff nodded, relief and caution warring on his face. Darlene found her voice. "This is ridiculous," she said. "He's manipulating you." The agent did not look at her. "Ma'am," he said, "do not interfere with an active assessment." The word assessment landed heavier than accusation. Paper froze in her hands. She tried again, volume rising, reaching for the room. It did not move. Authority had shifted without shouting, without threats. I stood back and watched the mountain reclaim its quiet. The code officer closed his folder. The deputies stepped away. The sheriff rubbed his temples. Darlene's phone buzzed. She stared at it, then at her son, who did not meet her eyes. The inspection did not happen. The convoy thinned. The unmarked vehicle remained until logs were secured. When the road cleared, the cold felt lighter. I returned inside and set the notebook on the table, open to a clean page. The agent paused at the door. "This won't end quickly," he said. "I know," I said. "Paper takes time." He nodded once and left. Outside, snow began again, deliberate and quiet. The forced inspection arrived with the confidence of people who believed the room already belonged to them. 2 patrol vehicles, a county code truck, and Darlene's SUV lined the edge of the drive where the cones still pretended to be permanent. Snow squeaked under boots. The sheriff stepped out last, face set to neutral, eyes already tired. Darlene stood forward, papers aligned, phone tucked away this time. She smiled at the group like a host welcoming guests to a house she didn't own. "Safety inspection," she announced, projecting. "Emergency authority will be brief." The code officer glanced at the cabin, then at the sheriff. Deputies positioned themselves where they could see hands and doors. Darlene moved to the steps without waiting, confidence filling the gaps where permission should live. I spoke once, evenly. "Before anyone enters, I need the jurisdictional basis and consent status on record." Darlene laughed lightly. "We've covered this, county review." "Statute number," I said. She waved a packet, "Emergency powers." "Statute number," I repeated, still mild. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Darlene, let's slow this down." She turned on him, smile tightening. "Sheriff, the community expects action." The code officer shifted. "I need consent or a warrant." Darlene's voice sharpened. "The HOA authorizes." "The HOA does not authorize entry here," I said. "Sheriff, may I request a supervisor present before this proceeds?" The sheriff nodded, relief flickering. He stepped aside to make the call. Darlene leaned close, dropping her voice. "You're embarrassing yourself." I looked past her at the tree line. "Please step back." She straightened, turning to the group. "He's obstructing an inspection." "On what authority?" the code officer asked quietly. I placed a call on a secure line, brief and precise. "Attempted inspection beyond jurisdiction, requesting oversight, location as discussed." Darlene scoffed. "This is theater." The unmarked vehicle rolled in without hurry, stopping well short of the steps. The agent stepped out, posture rigid, eyes scanning. He wore no insignia worth noticing and all the authority that mattered. He addressed me by formal title, voice carrying. Deputies straightened. The code officer's pen paused Medea. Darlene turned. Recognition moved across her face in stages like a slow spill. The voice first, then the posture, then the certainty. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Preserve all dispatch logs and body camera footage," the agent said to the sheriff. "Effective immediately." The sheriff nodded, "Yes." Darlene found volume. "This is an abuse of power." The agent did not look at her. "Ma'am, do not interfere with an active assessment." Assessment landed heavier than accusation. Paper froze in her hands. She stepped forward anyway. "He's manipulating you. He's hiding violations." The agent finally turned, eyes level. "Ma'am, step back." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then at him. "You can't do this to me," she said, quieter now. He didn't answer. He addressed the code officer. "Close your file, you'll receive guidance." The code officer nodded and snapped the folder shut, relief plain. Deputies shifted back, tension easing. The sheriff rubbed his temples and spoke carefully. "Inspection is suspended pending review." Darlene's voice rose, edges fraying. "You're letting him get away with." "With what?" the sheriff asked, sharper now. Silence answered. Darlene swallowed. She looked around for the room she usually moved. It didn't move. I said nothing. The mountain held the space. The agent asked the sheriff for confirmation on logs. The sheriff confirmed. The agent asked for copies. The sheriff agreed. Procedure replaced performance. Darlene stepped toward her son, stopped short, hands trembling. "We'll talk at home," she said. He didn't meet her eyes. "Not here." She laughed once, brittle. "You owe me." He looked at her then, just long enough. "I owe the job." That was it. The freeze arrived without drama. No shouting, no threats, just the sound of paper losing its grip. The convoy thinned. The code truck left. One patrol car followed. The sheriff lingered, nodding to me. "We'll be in touch," he said, meaning it this time. Darlene stood alone with her papers, the edges fluttering in wind. She gathered them with care that felt like habit. "This isn't over," she said to no one. The agent finished his notes and turned to me. "Next steps will be formal," he said. "I expect that," I said. He nodded once and returned to the unmarked vehicle. It rolled out, tires whispering over snow. Darlene watched it go, then looked at me. The mask was gone. What remained was calculations stripped of confidence. She opened her mouth, closed it, and walked back to her SUV without another word. When the road cleared, the cold felt lighter. I stood on the porch and listened to the quiet return, not peace yet, but space. I went inside and set the notebook on the table, open to a fresh page. The mountains settled around the cabin, indifferent to power plays, faithful to gravity. Outside, a patrol car passed without slowing. Inside, the ledger balanced itself, one entry at a time. Morning broke without ceremony. Snow fell clean and steady, covering cones, tire marks, and the thin scars of the last week. The mountain did what it always did when people stopped shouting. It erased. I stood at the window with coffee cooling in my hand and watched a county sedan pass without slowing. No lights, no pause, just movement like normal had remembered how to breathe. The investigation didn't arrive with sirens. It arrived with envelopes and calendar invites. State council requested records. County auditors asked for logs. Dispatch supervisors pulled tapes and tagged them for retention. The sheriff called once to confirm receipt and once more to apologize without saying the word. He sounded relieved to be answering upward instead of sideways. I thanked him and kept my voice even. Relief fades, paper lasts. At the HOA office, the board fractured fast. Emails leaked before lunch, members distancing themselves in writing, each sentence a small raft. Emergency authority became misinterpretation. County cooperation became assumption. Darlene's name appeared in subject lines more often than bylaws. The recorder from the hearings surfaced with timestamps that didn't line up. Someone noticed. Someone flagged it. The room turned cold without ever seeing snow. By afternoon, notices went out. Darlene was suspended pending review. Fines followed, not dramatic, just cumulative. Misuse of emergency services. Harassment patterns, possible records tampering. The HOA retained counsel and began rewriting procedures before being told to. They called it reform. It read like surrender. The sheriff visited once more, in daylight, hat off. He confirmed reimbursement orders and a moratorium on enforcement actions near my address. He said the department would be retraining on HOA calls. He said thank you for not making it harder. I said thank you for drawing a line. We shook hands because it was appropriate again. The private confrontation happened far from cameras, a kitchen with neutral walls, a table wiped too clean. The son stood across from his mother, posture unchanged, voice level. He didn't raise evidence. He stated outcomes. Investigations take time, careers don't pause, conflicts of interest don't care about intent. She tried laughter, then anger, then tears. None moved him. He told her she had endangered an operation and used his profession as leverage. He told her to retain counsel and stop calling him. When she said family mattered more than paperwork, he said paperwork was how families stayed out of court. The sentence ended the room. Outside, Winter leaned closer. Insurance reinstated with conditions. The bank relaxed. Contractors returned calls. The roadblock lifted without announcement. A county truck removed cones like they'd been misplaced furniture. The grader moved on. the mountain widened again. The HOA held a meeting without applause. Minutes were taken carefully. Votes happened quietly. A new interim president spoke about trust and transparency, words chosen like tools with fresh handles. No one said my name. That felt right. I spent the afternoon repairing the generator line, hands steady, breath slow. I replaced what had been cut and capped what didn't need feeding. Tools went back where they belonged. The cabin warmed. I opened windows for a minute to let smoke escape and then closed them again. Balance is a habit. Earl brought a pie and an apology he didn't owe. We ate standing up, watching clouds pull apart. He joked that the HOA would fine him for unapproved kindness. I told him to put it in writing. He laughed and left lighter than he arrived. Paperwork continued in the background, slow and thorough. Investigators asked questions that answered themselves. Dates lined up. Language repeated. The trail camera reappeared in an evidence photo, angle annotated. Someone had wanted to watch without being seen and forgot that watching leaves traces too. Darlene resigned before the final letter arrived. It was framed as health reasons. No one corrected it. Consequences don't require spectacle. They require consistency. She avoided my road afterward. I didn't see her again. At dusk, I walked the perimeter and filled old holes where stakes had been. Snow hid the work. The mountain accepted it. A patrol car passed once, steady speed, no glance. Normal had learned the route. I sat on the porch and listened to quiet settle the way it should. Not empty, earned. The notebook lay open beside me, pages thick with dates and facts. I closed it and set it inside the drawer where it would wait without asking. Authority doesn't announce itself. It documents, waits, and speaks when speaking matters. The mountain knows this. Winter knows it too. I split wood until dark, stacked it neat, and went inside, leaving the porch light off.